Hey, Mikey! Come here, come here. It's time for the 1DX comparison against the 5D Mark IV. I'll move out of your way.
We're doing the video? Well, alright then, here I come. Alright, where do I stand?
Stand over there by the wall.
By the wall?
Over
Alright.
by the window. Yeah.
Oh, window.
Alright.
I'll stand right here.
Cool, I got you. So, in this video, we're going to go over several settings with these two cameras and really see, obviously the 1DX Mark III is going to be better in the feature set. It's a more modern camera, but let's see how much better it actually is when compared with the 5D Mark IV. And do you really need to invest in that camera, or can you stick with the 5D Mark IV, or in that fact, the EOS R, which is comparable to the 5D Mark IV. So let's start these tests and see what we get. Alright, Mikey, stay there. First test we're going to do is dynamic range. Now I set both of these cameras in log mode and I've got the same exact settings. 35mm, f2.8, ISO 160, shutter 150th because I'm going to film, and it's right by the window and same lighting and same scenario. So you'll see both shots. Now what you're going to notice in this shot is the fact that Mikey over there is a little bit more cropped in on the 5D Mark IV. I'm recording both versions in 4K first, just so you can see the difference and see which one has a better performance. Okay, next test we're going to do is the comparison of the dual pixel autofocus between both cameras. Now the 5D Mark IV has face tracking with its dual pixel autofocus, but the 1DX Mark III has dual pixel autofocus, so it does the face tracking, but it also has eye detect autofocus, which means it'll follow your eye as you move around. Now Mikey, move around so we can see move around so we can see it follow you, and I'll record it on the computer. So there you go, you see the direct comparison. Now it seems that the 1DX Mark III, from what I've tested before, is a little quicker when it comes to fixating on the autofocus. Now I didn't change much of the autofocus settings on either camera, kind of left it as default as when it came in from the factory, and just turn on eye detect autofocus on the 1DX Mark III, which was not on by default. Moving next, we're going to do the slow motion challenge between both of these cameras. We're going to start off with 120 frames per second. You do have the ability to go up to 1080p 120 frames per second on the 1DX Mark III. On the 5D Mark IV it goes down to 720p. However, based off of this, you should be able only to tell that there's a minor difference. It shouldn't be major. So from that comparison, maybe we'll be able to see the additional detail if you really zoom in, but from far, I don't foresee there being much of a difference. Now jump around there, Mikey. That's what we want to see. Okay, now moving on to that slow motion, we're doing 60 frames per second slow motion. Now the 1DX Mark III can do 60 frames per second slow motion in 4K, as well as the higher frame rate. So we're going to test the RAW in a moment. But you can also do 60 frames per second and 1080p on the 5D Mark IV, which isn't 4K, but at the same time, we're looking for a stark difference here between the two modes. And in 60 frames per second, autofocus and audio works in both cameras. Now, we've got the crop here on the 5D Mark IV, but let's actually put the 1DX Mark III in crop mode and see how much it crops in on that 4K signal, and to see if it's better than the 5D Mark IV, which it kind of is, because the 1DX is a 20 megapixel camera, give or take. I believe it's 20 megapixels, while the 5D Mark IV is 31 megapixels, just about. And because of that, the video is going to actually stick to the middle of the sensor when cropping in, just to get the exact 4096 by 2160 pixels that it needs. Because the 5D Mark IV is a higher resolution full frame sensor, it actually needs to crop in tighter just to get that exact number of pixels. So you get a 1.74 times crop, where the 1DX Mark III is 20 megapixels. So to get the middle of the sensor, you're down to about slightly over possibly 1.2 times crop. So the crop isn't as drastic on that camera. So here's a disappointing fact. Now I'm going to move over to the 1DX Mark III. Alright, so I'm going into movie record quality on the 1DX Mark III, and from what you can see in the screen, I'm going into the movie record file size, and we're going to go down to the 1080p sections. But if you notice, the full HD, it's got 60 frames per second and 30 frames per second, both all-I and IPB, but no 1080p recording. And that's kind of a disappointment there. It's kind of sad that it has that. It doesn't have 24p and 1080p. But the 5D Mark IV does. So you can record 24 frames per second in the 5D Mark IV. So if you really want to stick to a smaller file size and stick to 1080p with 24 frames per second just to get that smooth buttery footage at a full frame mode on a Canon with dual pixel autofocus, stick to the 5D Mark IV when it actually comes to shooting 1080p and 24 frames per second, because you're not going to get it on the 1DX Mark III unless Canon does a firmware upgrade, which they did with the EOS RP, which initially didn't do 24 frames per second, but now it does. And now the final test that I'm going to do is really the image quality, image versus image. Now at first I'm going to leave these shots still recording log like I have been for most of this video on Mikey. Leave it recording log. Look at the uncolor corrected image. Which one looks more pleasing to you? To me personally, when I filmed yesterday and I used a fine detailed picture profile, I couldn't really tell the difference between this camera, the 1DX Mark III, and the 5D Mark IV. They look very similar. Canon's colors are great. The images out of camera look amazing, and it was pretty much exactly the same from what I can see. So you have a bit more versatility with the 1DX Mark III and the shooting video modes, but the 5D Mark IV produces almost an exact same image from what I can see. Now the 1DX Mark III records 10-bit 422 color internally, while the 5D Mark IV records 8-bit 422 internally. So the 1DX Mark III will give you a bit more flexibility when it comes to editing your colors. That and the fact that the 1DX Mark III records in 5.5K RAW, which you cannot compare when you compare that to the 5D Mark IV, which does not do RAW at all. But those file sizes are huge, and the 1DX Mark III requires you to use a CF Express card. It has two CF Express card slots, which gives it the ability to record RAW, 5.5K RAW, which the 5D Mark IV does not have. It has a CF card slot and an SD UHS 1 card slot, which sure you can get, again, high bitrate video footage, but you won't be able to get that RAW video. To be honest though, are you really going to use that RAW video when the compression is somewhat limited? We'll do another test on the RAW video comparison between the Blackmagic and the 1DX Mark III to see which one you'd want to take with you on a shoot where you absolutely need to record RAW. But that's it. That's all I gotta say about that. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below over this whole comparison. And as always, like, share, and you can make my day if you subscribe today. This is Magnus, and I'm out. See you guys later.
Are we done?
Yeah, you're done.
Samsung wins.